Ever wonder what it looks like to be a strong woman of faith in today's world? Today we sit down with Jenedy Paige, the inspiring artist and American Ninja warrior who shares her own journey of faith and resilience as she navigates the complexities, the heartaches, and the twists and turns that mortality has thrown at her.
Welcome to The Dents in My Armor, a podcast of becoming for LDS women.
Hello, listeners. We are so excited to have an amazing guest today. And as you know, she's Jenny, I'm Lee, and our guest is Jenedy Paige. Jenedy Paige is a professional oil painter with nearly 2 decades of experience in capturing spiritual themes in her realistic approach to painting. Her work has been collected by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and has been distributed worldwide. She is also a 5-time American Ninja Warrior athlete, which we're going to talk about that, guys, and believes the persistence she gained in the art world has added to her success in the ninja gym. She uses both her art and her ninja practice as a means of sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And just if you're not watching, but you're listening, I just want to tell you guys, Jenedy's actually painting while she's talking to us today. And we are just not only thrilled to have her, but humbled to be able to have this conversation with her today.
You're so sweet.
Jenedy, welcome. Is there anything else you'd like to share about yourself?
Well, I'm sure we will discover more in our conversation today, but all those moms out there will feel me on the multitasking, like trying to paint and do podcasts. I do this actually all the time. So I feel like it's actually better to paint and talk to somebody. I had a mentor once who said that you do your best work when your mind isn't 100% focused on it. Like you have like a little bit of a, distraction going on so you don't overthink your painting. So I actually have people come and talk to me all the time while I paint in the studio. So podcast is the same thing. It's just virtual. Yeah.
Well, that is, you know what? I think every single mom out there just latched onto what you're saying about your best work when you're not 100% there. That is, I'm liking that already. I'm feeling more successful as a person and as a mom already. All right. I just wanted to start us out, Jenedy, with a question. You were just featured in an article on boldjourney.com that I read, and there was this little, like a side comment, you're talking about your art and you're talking about all of these things. And you said, and I think we'll get into the art in a second, but I want to start with this question. There was this comment that you made about when God called you to be an artist, even though it felt like a big ask, you had spent 8 years developing better communication with him. And so you knew it was him asking, and so you went with it. And when I read that, it wasn't even like the point of the question in the article, but when I read that sentence, here's exactly what my brain did. It said, what did she do in those 8 years to develop this confidence that you knew? And now let's switch to the, second person. What did you do in those 8 years that when God asked a big thing of you, you knew it was his voice and you knew you could say yes?
Well, because you're here in my studio and because some people are on video, I have to, I'm a visual learner, so I'm going to partially answer this question with a little field trip over here to a wall in my studio. Okay. So this wall that you see behind me, this is my life in books, in journals. Okay, so the answer to your question, how did I develop this relationship with God? Well, when I was 10 years old, I had a very wise mom, still do have a very wise mom, and we had a family discussion one night, and she asked us about, how do you get to heaven, essentially? And we belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so I said, get baptized. And my brother said, serve a mission. And my other sibling said, be still in the temple. And My mom was like, those are all really great things, part of the covenant path, but they're not guarantees. And we were all just like, what? We, I don't know. And she's like, no, there's a guarantee. And she says it's a daily personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so she challenged us to do 3 things every day to build this relationship. And it was 1, pray; 2, write in a journal; and 3, read your scriptures. She called it the PJs, prayer journal scriptures. And I thought, wow, all I have to do is these three really simple things, and I will build a relationship with God. Okay. And I'm not going to lie, I was a really obedient child, but I just started that night. And at first it just seemed so simple. It was like, if you read some of my early journal entries, I wrote a lot about boys. I wrote a lot about school. I wrote a lot about sleepovers. I know we don't do those anymore, but back in the day, I wrote about hanging out with friends, shopping at the mall, like all these really insignificant things. And you're thinking, how is this like, and then my prayers were a lot the same. I would just pick like random verses to read. And then what happened though, it wasn't all those individual, nonsense writings. It was the pattern I was establishing, so that by the time I turned 14, that's when problems started to come into my life. And when you have a problem, suddenly you're not just writing about some silly thing you did that day, like you're writing about a matter of the heart. And then when you pray, you're not saying the same thing that you said the night before. You're like, God, I have a problem. And I'm supposed to bring my problems to you. I believe that you can help me somehow. And then when you read the scriptures, it's not find a random verse, it's I have a problem. And I've been told that if I read these books, like I will find solutions to my problems. So here I am seeking. And it was so beautiful because I found answers and I found solutions, even to this simple problem. Like my biggest problem, the biggest problem that came into my life was in 9th grade when my best friend from 8th grade didn't want to be my friend anymore. Which I know is not like a huge problem, but when you're 14, it feels like a huge problem, especially because I was super nerdy, I wasn't popular, and friends were not as easy to come by, So over time, what's so beautiful is like you in a very real way see evidence of God's hand in your life, because you're like, well, here was the problem, here was the solution. And that girl actually we didn't ever renew our relationship, but another girl moved in and we are still friends to this day. So, I remember writing like, oh, I didn't like this relationship's still broken, but there's this new girl. And so my journals, I call them like another testament of Jesus Christ, because they are like his dealings in my life. And this pattern, I carried it all the way through to today. But yeah, when you're talking about in college, I didn't have any talent, it just I became shockingly aware of it like the first day of college. Because when you're in a small town in Colorado, you think like, maybe I have ability. And then you go to the university and you're like, actually, I have no ability. And so when God told me, Jenedy, you can be an artist, because we had developed this relationship, I trusted him 100%.
I think that's incredibly powerful. And we're going to keep talking, but if we were to stop right now, this conversation would have been worth it. The eloquence that you talk about, your holy habits, and that's how Lee and I talk about that. We refer to them as holy habits. But to start establishing a pattern as a 10-year-old girl that laid a foundational piece as your relationship with Christ, that's incredibly powerful. And the beautiful part of that story and that example is those of us who perhaps didn't start our holy habits at the age of 10 or the age of 24 or the age of 40, we believe in the opportunity to try now and to start these holy habits today. And your example of that. And I love how you said, if he said I could do it, then I could do it. And I would love to have you talk a little bit more about that, because I don't know, was it really that simple for you? Or was there, I would imagine there were trial and error, and it wasn't just I picked up a paintbrush and I became this master artist. So yes, I knew that you trusted him, but there had to have been a process between that moment of, Jenedy, I'm telling you, you can be an artist, and the Jenedy that we see today that has this incredible art. So what was that process, even though it was a God directive?
Well, I'll tell you, the process is actually still happening today. I consider myself very much like a work in progress. But for me, I first of all, I went to school early. I still like I was here at my studio at 4:30 this morning. I still very much believe in these sacred early morning hours, but when I was in school, I learned that the building opened at 4 for janitors to clean it. And so I was like, hey, I felt like because I didn't have a lot of talent, I had all this time to make up for. Like these kids that have been drawing since they were, in kindergarten and knew they were going to be an artist their whole lives. And I was just really behind. And so I was like, I need to spend as much time at school as I can. So I would go to school at 4 and I would start each day with a prayer. And I would just say, God, like, I'm here to do the work. We both know what I can do by myself. So if anything cool is going to happen today, it's going to have to be a collaboration. Like I invited God to be a partner in the creation process with me because he told me he would. And so I was just, okay, God, we're here, we're at the studio. And remember how you said that you were going to help me do this? So now's the time that we would like to invoke that blessing. um, and it was so beautiful because in very literal and real ways, like he taught me through professors, right? He taught me through criticism in my classes, but then I also felt the Spirit so strongly teach me on a very personal level those early morning hours at the studio. And of course it was hard. Everything that has to do with becoming like Jesus Christ is difficult, right? Everything cool that we're ever going to do in our life is difficult. And it took a lot of hours. And it's, when I paint, I use very small brushes. And it's like one little stroke at a time. I'm building this painting. And I totally feel, God builds us in our lives like that, just one little piece at a time. And all he asks for us is that we just keep showing up every day in whatever thing that he's asked us to do. And he's very patient, and he knows that, it might take years and years for us to develop into the person he needs us to be, but we just show up every day, we invite him into our lives, and then we just do the work that day that he needs us to do.
That's incredible. And I want to, okay. So I think that all of us understand that when we're like doing something, we have a project or we have something we're trying to create, that we can invite God into the process and he can help us create that thing, right? In your
Mm-hmm.
case, like art. In other people's case, something else. What I became incredibly aware of just last year and what you just touched on is that God is really helping us create ourselves. That we we are the art. We are his creation. And I love that you're drawing a distinction between that and how God can help us build us. What an amazing that concept for me has blown open new possibilities for me. And so thank you for like underscoring and saying it. You said it way more eloquently than I just did, but I love that. Okay, so with art, we know, hopefully our listeners know, like your art. They've seen it. They've seen it in throughout church distribution. They've seen it in temples. They've seen it. Do you have a favorite piece of art that you've painted, or is the next one your favorite? What Tell us about your art itself,
Well, it feels a little bit like who's your favorite child.
right?
Um, but I will say there are probably like three really pivotal pieces so far that I could point out. The first one is going to be a portrait of baby Jesus I did 10 years ago called Little Lamb. And it was very pivotal to me because I learned so much about the nativity as I worked on it. And it was a piece I didn't want to do. In fact, you guys might not know this, but I kind of made a personal commitment to myself in college that I wasn't ever going to do like biblical art. I never intended on ever painting Jesus. And so it was 2014 when God was like, I think you should do a nativity painting. And I was like, no, don't want to do that. And this is a pattern that we'll hear throughout my story, is that God will inspire me or to do something, and the first thing I usually say is no. Dang it. I want to get better. I want to get better at like saying yes at the first ask. But anyways, he asked me again and again. I finally prayed about it, and I was like, okay, I'll read Luke 2. And so in the process of reading that, I realized, this is actually really simple. It's just like a baby band's manger and Mary. Like we paint these big nativity scenes, but it's actually really simple. So then I researched those elements, found out the manger is made out of limestone, found out that the swaddling bands were embroidered. Oh my gosh, never knew this before. So then I borrowed my friend's 7-day-old baby. I did this painting, and then I'm almost done with it. And then the Spirit says, Jenedy, wait, you're totally missing the point. And I was like, what do you mean? I learned all this cool stuff. And then God was like, no, Jenedy, when else in his life will he be wrapped in white linen and placed on a stone? Oh, I see it. Like, oh, wait, these few things that we knew about his birth, of course they would foreshadow his purpose and mortality. Of course he was born to die. Of course he was put on an altar from the very first day. And that painting was so powerful to me because it came with such like that emotional punch. And then on top of it, it had only been 2 years since I buried my firstborn son. And so I felt God like commiserating with me in the painting. The second painting that was really influential is called Coming Full Circle. It's actually on the wall here behind me. We just like, oh, you can't really see it. So anyways, it's of a woman kind of in this praying posture, but it's all about gratitude. And it's had some incredible answers to my prayers. And, sometimes as an artist, it's easy to paint when you're like sad and you're yearning for heaven and for something. I don't know, all creatives I think will agree with me that when you're in a depressed or sad state, like, dude, things just feel like so flowy or like creatively. But like sometimes when it works out on the other end, sometimes we're not as quick to like paint that, right? So I had these incredible answers. And so I said, I need to paint gratitude. I need to paint when things actually work out and the circle. And the big answer to my question was this ability to paint and study with a mentor named Bill Whitaker. And I actually painted this painting Coming Full Circle in his studio. And I finished it on a Friday, and he passed away on Tuesday. And it was like my capstone for my education with him. And so that painting has like, I always tell people it's the only painting I'll never sell. Sold baby Jesus. So I'll sell everything else, but Coming Full Circle is my piece, and it's my gratitude every day for all of the circles, all the ways that God keeps answering my prayers. And then the third most powerful piece is one I did just last year called Every Sparrow. And it's a piece that I've wanted to do for over a decade. I literally waited like over 10 years to paint this thing. And it's of a sparrow falling into the hands of God, the hands of the Savior. And it's because, my son, he fell in a pool. And so gravity and I have had a difficult relationship, and water and I have had a difficult relationship. And after he passed away, I asked God, like, was that just an accident? Do I just live on an earth with gravity and sometimes people fall? And oops, was that just an oops? And every time I asked that question, God took me to Matthew 10, where Jesus says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one shall not fall without your Father. Yea, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, for your worth is more value than many sparrows. And God would say, Jenedy, if I saw a sparrow fall, like, surely I saw your son. And the reason it took me so long to do the painting is because as an artist, I'm always painting for other people. Like, very rarely do I get to just sit down and paint whatever I want. And so it just got put on the back burner, and I collected dead birds in my freezer for years. Guys, reference. As an artist, you have, okay. And then, anyways, last year, the Church of Jesus Christ came to me and said, hey, would you be interested in doing a YouTube collaboration? And I was like, sure, let's do it. And they said I could paint anything that I wanted. It just had to be, maybe something inspirational, something that I could share my testimony of Jesus Christ through. And so I knew right away I got to paint the sparrow. And it's so beautiful to me how God works, because he actually put this painting in my heart a whole decade before I would ever get to paint it. Why would he do that? Well, I think for a couple reasons. I think sometimes the weight makes the thing more powerful in the end, because you had to wait. It like takes on greater emotional weight because of the weight. And I think also, I needed that decade to get better at painting. I needed to become the artist that could paint it. And then it was so beautiful because if it would have just been me if I would have just, painted it for myself, I probably would have just painted it like 12 inches by 24 inches. But because the church was asking me to do this, they're like, let's do it a little bit bigger. And I was like, okay. So we ended up painting it twice as big. It was like 48 inches by 24 inches, quite a large piece for me. And it just was all so much like cooler and bigger than I could have ever imagined. And then that God would offer me this platform to share it with millions of people. What a gift. And so I think this is like, God is so good because he took my heartache, he took my experiences, and it's like this recipe. He mixed it with time. He mixed it with the ability for me to more fully understand and implement the atonement of Jesus Christ in my life. And then he offered me the opportunity to paint it and then share that testimony with so many people, and I just love it because it was so much bigger than I could have done on my own. And so for all those reasons, that sparrow piece is another favorite.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And thank you for being vulnerable with us to share probably some of the darkest, hardest parts of your life and your heart. That speaks very highly of the work that you have done to allow yourself to be refined and not defined by the darkness. And I am just really humbled by you sharing all of that. As I listen to you, and because I happen to be mortal, I know that life is not just a point A to point B. And you've talked a lot about that there was some dark moments. How did you navigate maintaining that trust with Heavenly Father when one of the hardest things that mortality experiences? How did you say, I will still trust, even though the path was not straightforward? And if that's too vulnerable to share, then we'll move on to a different question. But it's just listening to you. I know that there are many of our listeners who are like, I've had darkness as well. How do I keep moving forward? How do I continue to trust in this God who I've maybe built a relationship, maybe I haven't, but how did you choose to keep moving forward?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm like such an open book that you don't ever have to like tiptoe around me. Like I'm happy to share. I feel like, I believe one of the purposes of our life here on earth is to gain experience and an education. And my personal education was very expensive. And so I try to use any opportunity that I can to like use that education to benefit the life of other people. So, but to answer your question, I feel like it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that I had developed this relationship. And I actually go and I speak a lot about this concept, but that relationships are messy. And I think sometimes we think because we have a relationship with a God that it's going to be somehow sunshine and roses the whole time. And I say, no, like just think about your deepest, most personal relationships, your mom, your best friend, your husband. Don't tell me you've never been disappointed by them, because I'll think you have a fake relationship. Like any personal, deep relationship that we have, we are going to experience heartache. Why? Well, because we are so emotionally invested in the relationship, right? And while God is perfect, we're not. And while God has all, knowledge and foresight, we don't. And so those things are going to come up against each other, right? So how do you stay in? Well, I think about momentum. And because I had put in all this time beforehand to develop this relationship, I couldn't throw it away when I was disappointed. And just to kind of like, I like this analogy a lot. My husband likes to cycle, and we have like a digital cycle trainer in our basement, and it has this program where you ride this stationary bike and it talks to the computer and it gives you like little trails that you can go on a screen, and it adjusts the tension, like if you're going up a hill. Anyways, I'm not a cyclist, but I thought, hey, this looks like fun. It's like gamified workout. Let's do this. And I get on the trainer, and I'm not really a cyclist, so I'm just like playing. I'm just like having a good time, just like low impact exercise. I love this. And then my husband comes on and he's like, you need to pick up your cadence. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I keep going and I see this little blue rainbow over the path on the screen. As I go through that blue rainbow, all of a sudden the pressure on my pedals, like the intensity goes really high and my feet are like, I'm like trying to move my feet. And like my husband's laughing. I'm like, what's wrong? Like, why does it feel like I've got 40-pound concrete blocks on the bottom of my feet? And he's like, oh, because you're just in an interval. And this is a higher intensity interval. And he's like, that's why I was telling you to pick up your pace or pick up your cadence. Because if you go into that high intensity interval with a higher cadence, then it's a lot easier to keep going. And I was like, nice to know. And like, the good thing is that these intervals only last like 10, 30 seconds, right? So it passes and I go back into the land of just happy pedaling. Well, next time I see this blue rainbow, they call this actually, my husband calls them the portals of pain. So next time I see a portal of pain on my path, I like pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. And then as I hit that high intensity, because my cadence was higher, it was a lot easier to manage and get through it. And I think about this concept of spiritual momentum, and how we have been counseled by our prophet to have increased our spiritual momentum. And I think what he's saying is like, you got to put in the time to develop this relationship with God well before the portal of pain, so that you have this momentum to carry you through when those things happen. And I feel like being able to start this relationship when I was 10, having it, tested and developed through my adolescent years and through college, that by the time I was 25, when my son was in the hospital, I had all of this testimony and this momentum to help carry me through. And then after he passed away, even though I was so mad, like, I knew I had nowhere else to go. And I already knew he was there. And I already knew, like, the fact that I didn't get what I wanted in no way changed the idea that I still knew who he was. He just let me down. And we had to work through that as a relationship. I told him, listen, I am so disappointed right now. Like, I know what you can do, and you didn't give me what I wanted. And I'm so mad. And tell me where there is a scripture story where there's a mom that's got all the faith in the world and she brings you her son and you say no. And then into that, to answer that question, God said, well, Jenedy, what about my son? Like, sometimes people have to die. I'm so sorry. And it's so beautiful because as you stay in the relationship, as you don't throw the relationship away, it takes time, just like every other relationship that has to heal. But you see so much beauty on the other side. Like my husband and I, when we first got married, we were so naive and so blissfully ignorant. And at the end of every day, it's just him and I living in this little apartment in Southern California. And I would look across the dinner table from him and I would say, what are we going to do with all our happiness? It's like life is so good and beautiful, But it was so shallow because we had no real depth to our relationship because we'd never really been through anything hard together, And then I think back and it was just a few years ago, we've been through all of this heartache and we've been to the other side, we've had more children, and we were randomly sitting at the dinner table and I had this memory of like when we were first married. And so I looked across the table at my husband and I said, what are we going to do with all our happiness? And it just like had all of this depth and beauty behind it because of the things that we had suffered and the things that we had gone through together. And I feel like our relationship with God can be the exact same way. Like maybe when we're young, when we're a kid, it feels very much like that relationship I had with my husband. Like, if you say a prayer, then you'll get what you want. And like, if you lose something, you can find it. And it's so easy, and then, but then we go through the portal of pain. And then on the other side, if we stick to the relationship, even though it's hard and it's messy, I promise you on the other end, you will have this depth and this beauty in your relationship with God that you didn't have before.
I don't even want to talk because all of the things that you just said as they're distilling on my heart, and my brain is just bringing to mind all these different moments from my own life of the hard and the beauty and the pain. And my husband and I, we on our 20th wedding anniversary, we went back to the same exact hotel where we spent our honeymoon.
Oh, cute.
And I remember walking through the door, right? Honeymoon, walking through the door of that hotel room. And what I had were hopes and dreams and aspirations and a lot of naivety, I think, as you said. And then as we walked through the door, that same door 20 years later, I just stopped and started crying. They were happy tears, they were joyful tears, but they were tears that were built on a foundation of depth in that relationship. That there were still some hopes and dreams left that 20 years later, but there was a lot of reality. And that we have invested something into this that has brought a joy to our lives that is unspeakable. And the reality, I think when I walked through the door 20 years later, it was reality that I carried with me and the life that we had built together. And so your words are so wise. I love that you took your big emotions to God. We say that a lot. We encourage ourselves and our listeners that God is big enough to handle your pain, your frustration, your disappointment, your anger, and that you can take that to him and work through it with him. I love how you're saying that this is a relationship that I'm not going to give up on just because one bad thing happened, no matter how big that big thing was. So thank you for sharing all of that. Okay, transitioning. I think all of our listeners get from just this part of the conversation so far that if there was a picture of what a strong woman was, your face would be there. Not that you'd be the only face, right? There are strong women out here. And so I want to transition into this, asking you a question about what you are creating now. This strong woman experience, the strong woman art. I've read enough about you to know that God put this in your heart, and you've already said you oftentimes say, "Okay, no," but yet here we are. So, can you tell us about the genesis of the Strong Woman experience and where it's headed?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of have to go back a little bit. So I will have to say I have not always been an athlete. And just like art was kind of something I had to learn, I feel like my athletic practice, I'm like the unlikely. So I was actually 34, a mom of four, or had four children, and God put it in my heart to apply to American Ninja Warrior, which I know sounds so crazy. I laugh when I say it because I laughed with the first time. I was like, yeah, right. And it just seems the most absurd thing God could ever ask me to do. And so, yeah, I said no. I said no. I passed on that one. But then God's persistent. So glad he's persistent. And so I finally prayed about it one day. You just have that prayer you never think you're going to have. And God for sure confirmed to me that that was something he wanted me to pursue. It's like, dang it, now we have to do it. I like Nephi, and thus the Lord commanded me, and I must obey. Shoot. So I just like did some little research, found out what I needed to do to apply, and you had to shoot a video. I had never been in a ninja gym before. But we did have like a trampoline park, it's called Airborne in Linden, Utah. They have some ninja obstacles there. So I like shot my video there, and anyways, I applied, and then after I applied, I told my husband, like, I don't think they're going to call me to compete on the show because I literally have no experience. But if they did and I hadn't like trained at all, and then look so dumb. So maybe I should take some ninja classes somewhere. So at the time, the only ninja gym here close to me was in Salt Lake, which is 45 minutes from my house. And so on Monday nights, I had to drive to Salt Lake and go to a ninja class. And you know, especially back then, moms didn't take ninja classes, you know. So I show up and they're like, "Oh, are you here to sign up your kids?" I was like, "Actually, I'm here for the class." Oh, great. Okay, okay. So I had like teenage boys as my coaches, which was awesome. And it was pretty humiliating. It involved a lot of throwing my body and falling on mats. And in fact, I remember like the first night, my hands hurt so bad because you tear them open, your calluses. They call them flappers. And they hurt so bad I could hardly hold the steering wheel driving home. And I was like, God, this is dumb. I am an artist. This is how I make money. And you're throwing these things into bars. I'm going to need more support next week. And so I just kept showing up, and then I tried to take it one obstacle at a time. And it was actually so empowering because the first time you go and you do absolutely nothing but fall and you think this is all impossible and this is stupid. But the next time you go, and I felt like this idea of like, just pick one thing, Jenedy. Like, just pick one of this myriad of obstacles and see if you can just do one thing this week that you couldn't do last week. And I was like, okay. And so I would do that. And all these impossible things over time started to become possible. And these walls that I had put in my head of possibility were shattered. And all of a sudden you're left with this like, well, I thought that was impossible, but then I did it. And what else am I telling myself is impossible, but is actually possible? And so that's one thing that I've loved about the sport of ninja. It has done that for me over and over again. Like the first lache I ever did, a lache is swinging on a metal bar, throwing your body and catching another metal bar. The first one I ever did was 6 feet, and I felt like a champion. And then that bar got moved to 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, 10 feet, 11 feet. At 40 years old, I did my biggest lache ever, 11 feet, just this past fall. And you just think like, that's so cool. But you also, it's like, I am a daughter of God. You are a daughter of God. We are his children. Who are we not to be able to do these things, right? I feel like Satan's really good at trying to keep us small, keep us in a small space. No, you can only do this. Or you can. No, he's a liar. That's all he does is lie. So if you feel something from him, just think the opposite, okay? So this path of ninja, they actually called me to compete on the show, and I was like so glad I took those classes. And I did surprisingly well. And then you get this really depressing email a few months later. Oh, Jenedy, you did so good for your rookie season, but you competed with too many celebrities and we don't have time for you on primetime. Well, that's defeating. Why did we even do this? That was a lot of work to like, no one's ever going to see it. And then you just kind of go back to the drawing board. Like, God, like, wait, why are we doing this again? And I mean, I did what you told me to do, and like they didn't even air it. So what are we doing now? And God's like, well, Jenedy, you've only been training like 3 months. Jenedy, what would happen if you trained for a whole year? And I kind of felt like when he asked me that, like I answered kind of like an obnoxious teenager, kind of like, would probably get better. But it's like not what I want to do, you know? But yeah, so I just kept taking those classes, and actually a gym opened closer to my house. And anyways, I'm not going to tell you the whole ninja story, but I'll just summarize it by saying I've now competed on 5 seasons, and I've competed in the World Series finals, and it's become this whole thing. It's funny because I feel like if I go back, when God first asked me, I felt like it was a random life tangent. Like, oh, I guess we had to compete on American Ninja Warrior. Like, that was weird. Now we're going to go back to, painting Jesus. Like, let's go back. Kind of like when, after Christ died and Peter was like, well, guess we're going to go fishing. And then God was like, no, Peter, no, like, I actually need you to be a different person. I actually need you to be like a missionary. And so for God, for me, it's like, no, Jenedy, this was not just a life. I actually need you to become a different person, Jenedy. So it was really interesting. After competing on the show 4 times, and I still had never been aired, I came home to my studio and I was mad. I mean, this had been years of investment. Like, why are we still doing this? And God was like, oh, wait, did you think this was about TV? Like, wait, do you think I care about NBC, Jenedy? And you're like, kind of feel dumb, but you're like, well, you're the one that asked me to do this. And he's like, Jenedy, no, like, look at you. you are a totally different person than you were 5 years ago. Like I care more about the development of an individual, Jenedy, than I do about TV. And like this was just a means. I needed you to become something different. And this was a means. Look at you. Look how strong you are. Remember where you were five? And you're like, oh yeah, I guess that's cooler than TV. And so I learned this big lesson, you know, because I thought it was all about TV. And that's another thing that I've learned through competing on American Ninja Warrior is like how much we value television. Like we say that we don't, but we do. Because that is the thing people always ask me is like, where am I going to see? Where do I watch you on TV? You know? Anyways, I actually are going to air me in June for the first time. So season number 5, they finally decided. So I haven't seen it yet, but because it comes out in June. Anyways, but what's funny is how we think when God asks us to do something, we theorize about the why. And for me, the why was like, oh, I'm gonna talk about Jesus Christ on TV. That's going to be awesome. But then it was like in the background, God was building this whole other story. And what it was is through these ninja competitions and things, like he led me to meet all these incredible women. And then I was at this ninja competition in Texas, and there was this star of American Ninja Warrior there, one of the best females that's ever been on the show. And God was like, ask her if you can paint her. And I was like, no, she's famous. And it's like, oh, Jenedy, how many times do we have to go through this? Like I ask you and then you just say, okay. So I was like, fine. So I walk over and I'm like, hey, her name's Jessie Graff. I'm like, hey, Jessie, like, I'm actually a better painter than I am a ninja. And, you know, maybe I could paint your portrait sometime. She's really nice, actually. So she was like, oh, that would be awesome. So I flew to Los Angeles. I spent the whole day with her. We did a photo shoot. And it was funny because I didn't know why I was there, really. Like, I knew God wanted me to paint her, but I didn't know why. And every painting that I do has like a story, a meaning, a message. Like I don't ever paint something just because it's pretty. So the whole time I'm thinking, what is the message? And then we go to the ninja gym that night. She does a pull-up and I see her do the pull-up. And all of a sudden it was like, that's what you need to paint. And I didn't know why, but okay. So I get this gorgeous reference of her doing a pull-up. And then I go home to my hotel. The next morning I wake up and God is like, Jenedy, I sent my kids to a world that's acted on by gravity. Did you realize that downward forces are acting on my kids at all times? Did you know those forces are both physical and spiritual? And I need you to pull up. And I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. Jenedy, what happens when you pull up? What happens when you resist that downward pull? You get stronger. What happens when you're stronger? You can help lift other people. Oh, well, that's cool. I'm going to paint that 6 feet tall. So I did. I had no idea why. I was just like, we're doing pull up because that's a cool message. Not sure what else I'm going to do with it. But then little by little, just like my paintings, layer by layer, stroke by stroke, all these other women start coming into my life and weaving their ways in. I start painting cancer survivors and moms and widows. And I was like, oh, it's like a show. Oh, I've never done a solo show, you guys. In my almost 2 decades of painting, I've never done a solo show. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, cool, we're gonna do a solo show. But then as I worked on the paintings, all their stories were so vibrant. I thought, how could it be? Like all these women should be there. And then it was like, oh no, wait, this is a conference. Oh, okay. And then it was like, well, you can't have a conference and just sit. I'd be dumb. Especially, a strong women conference. You can have a strong women conference and just sit. You can have lots of conferences and sit, but just not a strong women conference. So I was like, oh, we're going to make it an experience. So Strong Women Conference is happening September 26th of this year. The morning, it's going to start at like 9. We're going to be at the Hale Center Theater in Sandy, Utah. This gorgeous theater space. And there's going to be like an art walk with all the original paintings. And then we're going to have the conference where you're going to hear some of the stories live from the mouths of the actual women that I painted. Going to be interspersed with some beautiful musical numbers and some other cool things. Like my friend Allie does foot archery where she like shoots a bow and arrow with her feet. It's amazing. And then that's like the morning. Then we're going to have like a lunch. And then we're going to head to Impact Ninja, which is the largest ninja gym in the world and just coincidentally this happens to be like across the street from the Hale Center Theater. And it's 44,000 square feet, and we're going to fill this space with experiences for women to try. So, and we're talking spiritual, mental, physical strength. So, classes on journaling. I'm going to have a therapist talk about how movement can actually heal you from trauma. I'm going to talk about nutrition. We're going to do jujitsu. We've got aerial silks. We've got hip hop. We've got, of course, ninja obstacles. And it's just kind of this whole afternoon of kind of exploring. Like, I want to give women opportunities to just kind of have a little taste of all these different strength building exercises. Because sometimes I think we get stuck in our head like that strength has to look like a certain thing, or that even physical strength has to look like lifting weights at a gym. But I built all of this physical strength mostly from throwing my body around through the air. And it's like, for me, I think it's a lot more fun than just picking up weights. But you get to do you. And I think it's just going to be like, I'm so excited because I feel like we're so good at talking about spiritual strength at church. And we're so good at talking about physical strength in the gym. But these two strengths rarely come together. Like maybe once a year we have a lesson on health at church, right? But I'm saying like we are a dual being. We are body and spirit. Why did we come to this earth? To get a body? So we can learn to become like God? It's almost like the body's important. It's almost like the body is like part of our salvation. Even so much so that every ordinance that we perform in the church, from baptism to sealing, they all require a body. So much so that in our faith, we perform ordinances for the dead in the temple because they do not have a body. We offer our body up as proxy on their behalf. Why? Why can't a spirit in heaven just say like, oh, I accept Jesus, I want to make that covenant? Why do they need a body? Well, because bodies are important. And I think for years we've had this disconnect between these two things. And I have learned in my own experience, like my body was strengthened and it strengthened my spirit. The thing that I did the day after my son died, well, he died on a Saturday. I went to church on Sunday. On Monday, I went for a run. And I ran. And I ran. And I cried. And my body mourned with my spirit. And we moved. And it was better because of it. And I have a friend who is going through the hardest trial she's ever gone through. And right before, we've been best friends forever. And she's like, I want to get fit. So she started doing strength building, started cleaning up her diet. And then she had no idea, but this huge portal of pain was just waiting for her. And she's like, Jen, I am so glad that I started taking care of my body before all of this happened, because I feel physically stronger and physically more capable to take on this huge trial, And so I feel this calling that God wants me to encourage his daughters to unite their strengths, and because women affect their children, who affect the next generation. I think about this quote that Gordon B. Hinckley once shared, where he says, like, when God wants a great wrong righted, or a great work done in the world, does he send his armies? Does he send his thunderbolts? No, he sends a baby to a mother. That is how God does his work. And so I feel like if I can help my sisters to become strong, they will in turn, just in the course of being a mom, also strengthen their family and strengthen God's people.
That is incredible, Jenedy.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sorry, and I'm far more emotional than you need to to take from me right now. But that just the power in what you're saying, and I know for our listeners, I know for myself, that there is such power and there's such truth in what you said. And as I'm listening to you, and this is going to be our final question as we wrap up our time with you. But I'm like, oh, I could talk to you and listen to you for about a week straight. So but just for time reasons, as I'm listening to you, I am thinking of women I know, women I have been, where when time has felt dark, what encouragement, if you could give anything, if you could look in any woman's eyes who is like, I'm in a dark place, I'm in a portal of pain, what encouragement would you give her?
So I actually just went on a walk with a friend in our neighborhood this past evening, yesterday. And she's in a portal of pain. And the advice that I gave her was this: I said, you kind of have two problems. One, you don't know what to do. Two, you don't know who you are. And so I said, we're going to start with the second problem first. You need to discover who you are. How do you know who you are and what you're capable of? Well, I recommend a daily personal relationship with Jesus Christ, going back to where we started. When you develop a personal relationship with him, he introduces you to yourself, just like Lee kind of talked about earlier. And so I said, try your best to give him some time every day to develop a relationship. As you come to know Jesus Christ, who he is, he introduces you to yourself. And he will let you know, you will feel your worth, your value, what you're capable of as a daughter of God. And then what's so beautiful is when you solve that problem, very naturally, you will know what to do. It will solve your first problem. Because as you develop a relationship with him, as you take your problems to him, you will receive revelation. You will receive little thoughts that will come into your mind. Hey, I need you to do this. And you're probably going to reject all of those ideas the first time. That's okay. You're human. We're human. But as those ideas continue to come, pray about it. And when you feel that it is right, act on those things. And that is literally the answer to everything that you face in life, is develop the relationship, know who you are, seek his guidance, his revelation in your life, and then act and do the thing that he needs you to do.
Thank you. That is beautiful and powerful and something that all of us can work on. How do our listeners find you, to follow you, to learn more from you? Because there are things I was learning about you on your Instagram post that we didn't even touch that I would have loved to. But again, in light of time, we're not even going to start those conversations. But how do our listeners find you, and how do they find your the Strong Woman Experience Conference?
Yeah, so I'm very active on Instagram. I post everything from faith building stories to my paintings in progress to ninja videos. So it's kind of random, but it's good. Come along for the ride. My website is jenedypaige.com, Jenedy. You only have to know how to spell my first name, and you can basically find me all over the internet, because my mom was inspired with this. When I was born, she just pulled this name out of the air, which is great for search engine optimization. And then the Strong Women Experience, you just go to strongwomenexperience.com. You guys, that handle was never taken. Like, that website was never taken. How? Okay. But also Strong Women Experience on Instagram is where you'll see all the content related to that. And tickets actually go on sale. Well, this will be in April. So tickets are on sale right now at strongwomenexperience.com. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been an edifying time for Lee and I, and for our listeners. We are so grateful for you taking the time out of your life to share your wisdom. And I love how you called it something about your personal education is very expensive. And I love that you are willing to share your very expensive education with us. Until next time, she's Lee and I'm Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Dents in My Armor podcast. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast and join the conversation as you comment and share with your family and friends.